Okay, guys. So this is the review video for the Unit 2 review. There's actually going to be two separate videos. One I made last year, I think I put together for the second part of the review. So if you watch that, you can check that out and everything else and see that. For the sound quality on that one is not as good as this one. It was made when I was in my classroom and there was a loud AC vent, and I tried to edit it out, but it didn't go very well, and also didn't have the nice microphone that I now have. So it definitely, I can tell a big difference in the sound quality in the voice and everything, and then also just, a year and a half of talking to people through the computer made that sound better. So anyway, I've rambled on too much about sound quality, not enough talking about economics. So let's get started here with that. So when we're talking about identifying these terms, just kind of understanding what they are. So remember, real GDP and nominal GDP are interrelated. You also need to check out the formula sheet that I uploaded into the course materials section of Google Classroom for you. So be on the lookout for that. So nominal, well, I'll actually go in reverse order. Nominal GDP is just the total value of all final goods and services as calculated using the formula consumer spending plus investment spending plus government spending plus exports minus imports. Okay, so that is nominal GDP. Real GDP takes that value and adjusts it for inflation, okay, by basically using the base year prices to calculate that out. All right, so make sure you kind of understand that and you're good to go on that. So again, nominal, just the value of it. Real takes away the impact of inflation by using a base year's prices. Structural unemployment is unemployment due to a mismatch in the skills of job seekers and jobs that are available. Either there's too many people with those skills looking for too few jobs, or there's not enough people with the skills to fill in those jobs, and that causes that structural unemployment. Cyclical unemployment is unemployment caused by a recession. You're laid off because the economy is not doing well. Frictional unemployment is unemployment due to a job search. So you have the ability there so you quit your job, and that time in between when you quit and when you find something else is frictional unemployment. Inflation is when prices change from one year to the next, or I should say when prices increase from one year to the next. The Consumer Price Index is a federal government price index where they you can see the official percentages of what they use in the Consumer Price Index in the PowerPoint video that I put together. But they add up the values of certain goods and services that the typical American family purchases, and they calculate how much that changes using the price index formula that we talked about. Nominal interest, I should say rate. I guess I forgot to add rate. Nominal interest rate is just the interest rate you pay to borrow money, or that you earn from banks when they borrow your money. Okay, so it's either goes both ways. Typically, though, when we're talking about interest rates, most of the time we're talking about for borrowing money. So it's just the percentage you're charged on the amount of money that you've borrowed. The real interest rate takes that nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate. Okay, so you take out the effect of inflation. Again, anytime you see the word real, you're taking out the inflation rate. The circular flow model, you can find a diagram with that on in the Google Classroom on that formula sheet for you there. Okay, formulas. The labor force participation rate is going to be the number of people in the labor force divided by the population multiplied by 100. Again, you're going to be able to see that. Now, the unemployment rate, it's not necessarily a formula for I guess technically you would do the natural rate of unemployment plus cyclical unemployment, but just know it's the percentage of people in the labor force that do not have a job. So it's the number of unemployed people divided by the labor force times 100. Okay. Natural unemployment is frictional plus structural. Okay, again, that's frictional plus structural unemployment for the natural rate of unemployment. The actual unemployment rate is that one above. I don't know why I have that twice. I guess I was tired when I made this, so I apologize for that. The inflation rate is the price level in year 2 minus the price level in year 1 divided by the price level in year 1 times 100. The price index in a given year is the cost of the market basket in that given year divided by the cost of the market basket in the base year times 100. And the inflation rate using price indexes is the price index value in year 2 minus the price index in year 1 divided by year 1 times 100. Okay, so if you need to rewind that and go back and re-listen to that, you can feel free to go ahead and do that. Other areas of importance, all right, the difference in nominal and real GDP. So again, real GDP just takes away the impact of inflation. That's the biggest thing for you to know and understand. The main formula that we use in this class for calculating GDP is consumer spending plus investment spending plus government spending plus exports minus imports, or Sig X minus IM. Which type of unemployment is best? That is going to be frictional, because that shows that there's confidence in the economy if people are willing to quit and leave their job. What are some things not counted in GDP? This is important to understand because GDP is not a perfect formula, and so understanding what things are not counted in it is important to kind of understand where those shortcomings of GDP are. So things not counted in GDP include the purchase of used products. It does not count happiness. It does not count the purchase of intermediate goods and services. And there's a lot of non-market transactions that are missed as a result of GDP, okay? Or as a fact that they can't be calculated in GDP, okay? So there's a lot of things that do not count in GDP. What can make the unemployment rate be an inaccurate measure of the true number of people without a job? That's if people fall out of the labor force because they give up looking for a job. So if you're looking for months and months and months, and you get really discouraged and you just say, all right, I'm going to take some time off from looking. I need a couple months to figure things out. You're out of the labor force. And so the number of unemployed people, actually, you're no longer counted as unemployed. So that unemployment rate could actually look better than what it truly is, meaning a lower percentage than what it truly is if there's that many people not in the labor force. Some requirements to be considered employed. To be considered employed, you have to have a job that pays you money. Volunteering doesn't count. Okay, you have to be paid in some way. Now, your compensation could be different. You could, even if you're working for, say, room and board, like let's say you have a family member that lives in a cool city like Denver, and they own a restaurant, and they say, hey, come work at this restaurant for 15 hours a week, and we'll give you a free place to stay. You have a job. Even if they don't pay you at that place of employment, if they pay you by giving you something of value, then that counts as working. Okay. To be unemployed, you have to not have a job but be actively seeking employment. That's the key there. You have to be actively seeking employment. Who is hurt by unexpected inflation? That would be people who lend money primarily. People who lend money are hurt by unexpected inflation. Who is helped? People who borrow money, because now the real amount you pay back has gone down. How is the purchase of a new home counted in GDP? Consumer spending, of course. Even though it's a new home, even though people say buying a home is an investment, that's why I asked this question this way, it still counts as consumer spending. Once you buy that house, it's consumer spending of new. Now, if it's a used house, remember, it doesn't count in GDP, but because it is new, it does. Okay, so on to the progress check. I'm going to kind of explain briefly the answers to each of these questions. Hopefully this kind of helps you make sense of it, okay? Now, which statement is true about the circular flow diagram of the economy? C, the market for factors of production connects spending by firms to household income. All right, so when firms spend money in factor markets, they are paying us, the people, for our factors of production. Okay. Number 2, which statement is true about the approaches used to measure the value of the nation's GDP? E, the expenditure approach to calculating GDP sums consumption spending, investment spending, government spending, and net exports. All right, so hopefully that one was pretty straightforward and easy for you. Number 3, country X's macroeconomic data in 2017. All right, so you calculate country X's nominal GDP for 2017 using the expenditures approach. You would add up consumption spending plus government spending plus investment spending plus net exports, and if you do that, you would get $19 billion. Everything else is just noise. Number 4, which of the following describes the limitation of GDP? C, it does not account for the distribution of income in a nation or income inequality. That's a huge negative thing, right? You might have a country that has a really high GDP or GDP per capita, but it doesn't mean that people are as well off everywhere. Or, you might have some people that make a ton and a bunch of people that make none, basically. So, Number 5, which of the following is true about gross domestic product? E, calculations of GDP include the unsold inventories of goods produced within the borders of the country. That becomes unplanned inventory investment, okay? Because essentially companies are building up their inventories. Number 6, as a measure of economic performance, the United States GDP accounts for which of the following? D, the cleanup of an oil spill. So if you think about it, even though that sounds kind of weird, they're buying the products used to clean up an oil spill. Okay. Now, if you look at these other things, none of these other things count. All right. Within GDP, you can't count black market stuff. You can't count using things that are free that you're not buying or anything like that, or growing vegetables or anything like that. Okay, that doesn't count in GDP, but cleaning up of an oil spill does. All right. 7, which of the following is classified as a discouraged worker? So this is someone who, it's B, Sarah. She's been unable to find a job, and she abandoned her job search. Okay, so that is the key. She abandoned it. She's discouraged now. She gave up looking for work. Number 8, which type of unemployment describes the situation of a factory worker displaced by automation? E, structural. I guarantee you that's going to come up on this test, and I guarantee you that a question like that is going to come up on the AP exam. Okay. I can't 100% guarantee on the AP exam because you never know, but that usually is something that comes up on the AP exam. Number 9, given the labor market data above, what are the labor force participation rate and the unemployment rate? If you calculate all that, the labor force participation rate is 60% and the unemployment rate is 10%. Okay, and again, labor force participation rate is the number of people in the labor force divided by the number of people in the population. Okay. Number 10, suppose the consumer price index was 100 on January 1st, 2017 and 110 on January 1st, 2018 with no changes in nominal wages. Which of the following is definitely true about the economy between January and 2017, January 2018? A, the inflation rate was 10%. Pretty straightforward there, okay? That's what we can tell from there, all right? Okay, Jan works a 30-hour week for a minimum wage of $10 an hour. Suppose that last year is the base year for the consumer price index, which is along is true about Jan's real wage if at the end of the year the CPI is 125. Jan's real wage is $8 per hour at the end of the year because we would do because essentially she's making that much less per year. I'm sorry, guys. I'm pretty sure College Board made a mistake there. I think that should be $7.50 an hour because if inflation went up by 25%, then that's only 1/5 of a decrease in her salary. So it should be $7.50. So I apologize for College Board making that mistake because they put that together. And yes, I am offloading the blame onto myself, from myself onto them. So. Okay, so number 12, which of the following terms describes the slowdown in the rate of increase in the consumer price index? That would be disinflation. So that's where if you're not in deflation, it's just the rate of inflation has gone down. So it's disinflation, okay? So instead of being 3%, it's 2%, and then the next year, instead of 2%, it's 1%. We still have inflation, it's just going down, so it's disinflation. Last year, Myron purchased a $10,000 certificate of deposit with a 3% rate of interest from his bank. The government reported that prices on average have fallen by 5% during the current year. Which of the following can be included as a result of this transaction? C, Myron gains while the bank loses. So he made not only 3%, but then his money gained an additional 5%. The bank was left having to pay that. So in a real sense, they lost that much money. Number 14, which of the following will happen when the actual inflation rate exceeds the expected inflation rate? C, this will harm lenders with fixed rate loans. All right, 15, labor unions negotiated a 3-year contract with employers in the automobile industry. They agreed to a 3% per year increase over the next 3 years. How would each group be affected by an actual inflation rate of 4% next year? E, workers would be worse off and the employers would be better off because in a real sense, the employers don't have to give them any. They're actually paying them less money. Number 16, which of the following describes the difference between nominal gross domestic product and real gross domestic product? That would be B, nominal GDP uses current prices to measure the value of final output, while real GDP uses constant prices. Number 17, which of the following is the correct calculation of real GDP? that would be real GDP is equal to nominal GDP divided by the GDP deflator. I will tell you this, there will not be any questions using the GDP deflator on this unit. We actually will cover that in 2 units from now, the GDP deflator. So I apologize. I did not realize that was a question in here. So that's the correct answer for you, but don't worry, that will not be on this unit test. Okay. Number 18. Suppose Miguel wants to know the value of real gross domestic product for 2011 in terms of the base year $1984. In 1984, nominal GDP was $10 billion. In 2011, nominal GDP was $15 billion, and the price deflator was 200. Well, we can use this to figure it out if we know the right answer up here. So real GDP in 1984 dollars would be equal to which of the following $7.5 billion? Okay, and so basically what you would do to calculate that out, you would do the nominal GDP of 15 billion divided by the deflator of 200 times 100. Okay, and so that gives you the actual real GDP there. Okay, so again, you will not see a question like that. We're going to do more work with GDP deflators in a later unit. The output gap is measured by which of the following? That is the difference between actual and potential GDP. That again, that is actually also another question in the next unit that we address more specifically. So you won't see a question. Essentially, I don't think I mentioned this in any of the lectures. So essentially what the output gap is that there's such a thing called the potential GDP that economists expect a country or an economy to have. Anything that is different from potential represents an output gap, because output is another word for GDP. So let's say they expected GDP, the potential GDP is $20 billion, but the economy actually had a $22 billion GDP. Well, you had a $2 billion output gap in the positive direction. Okay, you had too much GDP. If it was 18 billion, you would have a negative 2 billion output gap. Okay, and so that's kind of that difference. And the reason why they track that is because that's a key indicator whether we're in a recession or potentially heading into an inflationary period. So that's actually going to come up more in the next unit. It'll be one of the first things that we talk about in that. So you'll see that coming up after spring break. And so from that, the business cycle diagram below shows the cyclical movement of actual and real GDP relative to potential real GDP over time in the nation of Fisherland. All right. The economy of Fisherland is at full employment for which year in the above diagram? So that basically is where potential and actual meet. That would be 2015 is the only option that they have for you here. That you can choose from. Again, this is actually a good preview for that next unit, although, again, this will not be on the test. Unfortunately, I don't have control over these progress checks and the questions that are asked there. And then lastly, when an economy is at a trough of the business cycle, which of the following is then true about the state of the economy? A, there is a recessionary gap. Basically, that just means there's a recession happening, okay? And so hopefully you should kind of remember that from talking about the business cycle graph last unit. And those are key economic indicators, right? The unemployment rate is high, inflation is low during a recession, okay? When we are expanding and we get above our potential, like you can see in this graph up here above the potential GDP, then we're in a potentially inflationary period, and then it comes down and back up and everything else. So anyway, we'll talk more about that in the next unit. So specifically recessionary versus inflationary gaps, what they mean and how we go about correcting them. So anyway, that's all for today. If you have any questions, write them down, let me know. And I will try and address them before the test. But yeah, like I said, anything that I said, there won't be questions about that on the test. There won't be questions about that on the test. So if you were confused over that, it's probably because it wasn't in any of the lecture videos or anything else. So you're good to go. Have a great rest of your day. I hope that this helps out again like it did the last time, or like it seemed to the last time. And if you have any questions, just let me know.